The word scope describes the visibility of the variables, functions and constants in your code. Every program is made up of elements with well-defined boundaries. Now, these program elements might be anything from an entire code file to a single function. So you could think of the function having a boundary that defines its scope and the entire code file having a different boundary which defines its scope. Let's start by looking at local variables. These are variables that are defined inside a function, and we say they have local scope, local to that function. In fact, so have parameters declared between parentheses in a function header. For example, here the argument int I defines a parameter called I, and that parameter, that argument name I, is only visible, only usable inside this function, find char type. Now, these local variables only exist within the function. Code outside the function can't access local variables. In this example, you can see that the variable num has been declared in func1, so it's local to func1. It hasn't been declared in func2, so it is not local to func2. It's not in the scope of that function. So what happens when I run it? Well, I can't even build it. The compiler says there are errors, and if I look down here, it gives me an error message. It says num is undeclared. First use in this function. I double click it and it points me straight to my attempt in func2 to assign a value to num. So that's local variables. What about global variables? Variables that are defined outside a function, that is, in the main body of the code file, are said to have global scope. Now up here I've commented this out so far, but I'm going to uncomment this. I've declared this int num outside any of the functions in the code file, so it's going to have scope throughout that file. It's going to be global. Now, being global, it's available to all the functions in the code file. So here it would be available for use in principle by both func1 and func2. But, and this is important, when a local variable is declared with the same name as a global variable, the local variable will be used instead of the global variable. So here I've declared the num variable, which is local to func1. So that variable is used instead of the global variable in that function, because those two variables have the same name and the local one has priority. But the other function, func2, that has no local variable called num, so it uses the global variable with that name. Remember that even though both functions refer to a variable of the name num, these are different variables. Func1 gives priority to its locally defined variable. Func2 has no locally defined variable with this name, and so it goes looking further afield into a broader scope, and it finds that there is indeed one with that name defined globally. That's the one up here. So now I should be able to compile and run this program, and you can see that first of all the func1 variable value is displayed, which is 100, that's the local variable. Then func2 displays its value, that's the global variable. So that's an example of a local and a global variable with the same names.